3 years ago, I put up a nest box and started to film the activity of it. And for 3 years, the same pair of birds came back. And the story they told was one of tragedy, personal loss, but lastly, and certainly not least, perseverance. And so this is Biddy and Mileys' story. And yes, our story starts back in 2020 on the 6th of March. And where a pair of blue tits like no other, decided to check out a new feature in their habitat. A new nest box and a new home. We were first visited by Miley, a beautiful male blue tit, looking very sharp. But the real hero of the story was yet to arrive. Biddy, a scruffy looking female blue tit that made it possible to identify her year after year. And thankfully, Biddy liked what she saw in this new home. Because on the 1st of April, she started to build the very first nest in the nest box. And the females are the only ones to do this, and it can take quite a few days. They can have it built in 3 or 4 days, but generally they span this out, and it really, what dictates this is how the weather is playing out. If it's really good weather, they'll build fairly quickly. But something that's always so apparent is they work tirelessly. And she brought in so much moss in 2020 that it nearly blocked the camera. In coming years, I've moved the position of the camera to help this. And when the nest is complete and lined with feathers, she'll eventually lay an egg a day. And on the 24th of April, we get our first glimpse of our first eggs in the nest box. Perfect little natural treasures containing all the ingredients necessary for life. But Biddy didn't have it all her own way. We can see here that a cat actually tried to get into the nest the following night. But luckily the cat was unsuccessful in its endeavours, and on the 3rd of May, we had our first chicks. Yes, Biddy had successfully incubated her clutch of eggs, and we had our first little chick in our nest box. And the first few weeks are crucial for these chicks. They're only just out of the eggs, and they're straight away looking for a bit of dinner. And Biddy and Miley took no time in bringing in some food this year. They were straight on it, and food was certainly coming into the nest box. And blue tits try very hard to make all their chicks hatch within a day of each other, so there are no runts of the clutch. And we see here just an hour later, more chicks have hatched. And so there was 5 hungry little mouths to feed. But unfortunately, this story was to take a bit of a tragic turn. In the early hours of the following morning, Biddy realised that she had managed to get stuck in the nest. A piece of human hair had tangled itself up in a chick, the nest, and Biddy's foot, which translated to Biddy being fastened down to the nest cup, and you can see her here very clearly trying to break out. And we see through the night vision that she first notices around 5 o'clock, and we see an hour later she's made it a little bit further, but still ultimately really stuck in the nest box. Miley tries to continue to feed the chicks, but Biddy is getting more and more distressed, even pecking at the entrance hole in desperation. So as this story progressed, Biddy ended up destroying her nest in her attempts to break free. And this ultimately was a death sentence for her 5 chicks. You can see her here, she looks visibly exhausted. And try as she might, she just can't seem to break free from the chick and the nest that has her harnessed down. You can really see our poor Biddy is very visually distressed. And it was around this time when I was waking up and starting to realise what was going on. And eventually I decided to intervene. I thought it best, rather than sentencing Biddy to a slow and I'm sure painful death otherwise, I thought it was best to rescue her. I freed Biddy from her entanglement and released her and tried to put the nest back together as best I could, but unfortunately and ultimately, she never returned to the nest and the chicks died. And that was a very tragic and sudden end to our 2020 nesting season, and I assumed we'd never see Biddy again. But on the 28th of January the following year, a male blue tit arrives, followed by a scruffy-faced female. Biddy was back in action. And personally, I thought this was great. Biddy was back to get some retribution after last year's catastrophe. 30th of March, she brought in her first little bit of nesting material and continued to build a nest. I also changed camera systems and very slightly put it higher in the nest box. And Biddy didn't disappoint. She worked tirelessly, and by the 23rd of April, we had 5 new eggs in the nest. And after successfully incubating on the 6th of May, our new chicks started to hatch. And Biddy and Miley wasted no time in trying and starting to feed their chicks. But the weather had other plans. The weather in the 2021 nesting season was god awful. Storm after storm blew in, and this washed all available food off the trees and bushes, and by the 10th we had our first casualty. And just a few hours later, yet another chick perished. They brought in what food they could, but ultimately, and it was very obviously, that not enough food was coming in, and Miley the male was also having trouble feeding the chicks. And sadly that meant by 9 o'clock that evening another 2 chicks had died. We see Biddy here taking out the first one and coming straight back in for that second chick. 4 chicks perishing in the one day. That's a bad day in the office by anyone's standards. And that left just 2 chicks for them to feed. The weather did let up slightly for a couple of days, but it was still raining a lot, and that meant the parents and the chicks weren't getting a lot of food, and this led to some of the weirdest behaviour I've ever seen. Biddy, at around 12:10 on the 13th, was looking like she was about to leave the nest box. Now, on reflecting on this, I believe Biddy has not got enough food during the day and needs to go find something to eat. These little birds have very fast metabolism and need to keep on top of the nutrition that they're bringing in, and she actually leaves at 12:20. And she then proceeds to, for the rest of the night, try to make it back in. But as it's being pitch black, she can't find the nesting hole, and it's not till 4 o'clock that she makes it back to what I can only imagine are 2 very, very cold chicks. But amazingly, these chicks actually survived that night, which I had wrote them off, to be perfectly honest. But it all seemed a little bit too much for one chick, and on the 15th of May, we actually had lost another chick and we were down to our very last. The weather improved for a couple of days, which meant they could keep this chick alive right up till the 20th, when another heavy day of rain arrived. And unfortunately, that chick did not get enough food on the 20th. And on the morning of the 21st, the chick had perished, unfortunately, through the night. And as you can imagine, Biddy and Miley seemed to be a little bit distressed about this situation, But myself and the viewers following this nest box were also sadly disappointed and saddened by Biddy and Mileys' run of bad luck. So, 2022. Would Biddy and Miley return, and would they, if so, have a successful year? Well, on the 22nd of March, we got our first answer. A lovely male blue tit arriving. But is it Miley? And who's about to arrive in? Is it Biddy? And indeed it is, instantly recognisable by her scruffy little face. Biddy and Miley have put huge resources in trying to get their genetic code into the next generation of offspring, and for 2 years straight they have unfortunately failed. But they both took it in their stride, and on the 23rd of March, Biddy began building her nest for the third time, with Miley bringing in some food for her here and there. I personally love watching them build their nests, and if you guys are interested in these sort of videos, head to my channel and head to my playlists where I actually have all these nesting seasons on day-to-day basis and in a whole lot more detail than what you're seeing now. And on the 12th of April, Biddy has finally finished her nest for the third time, and she deserves a little nap. And amazingly, we actually see Biddy and Miley mating this year in the nest box. And we see Biddy there leaving with a bit of a bedhead. And where does that leave us? Yes, to egg laying. Egg laying is usually done early in the morning, and you can see Biddy taking some deep breaths. And we did have some unwanted visitors in the 2022 nest box season. Here we see a starling come in, a formidable bird that would make short work of Biddy if she could get her beak at her. But this doesn't stop Biddy defending her nest. She makes herself look and sound as aggressive as possible. Thankfully, however, the hole in this nest box is just too small for the starling to fit its head in. But I don't think that takes away in any way just how scary that would be to Biddy. And on the 6th of May, we have our first chick in the nest box in 2022. Little does this chick know that it's come a long way to get them this far. Miley is straight in trying to feed the newly hatched chick, but quite frankly, the chick is still very concerned with trying to get its head out of the eggshell. We can see that there's actually 2 chicks hatched there at this time. What a privilege to see these little tender moments. But the reality is that the hard work really starts now. Enough food needs to be kept being brought in for these chicks. And ultimately, only 4 chicks actually hatch. I thought there was 5 eggs this year, but only 4 seemed to hatch. And sadly, a chick accidentally got dragged from the nest this year. Luckily, this was spotted on the live stream, and I was around to actually find the chick, and the chick was alive. I fed the chick, and I managed to place the chick on a fork and back into the nest cup. An unusual scene for sure. And it was going to be very interesting to see if all 4 of these chicks were going to survive. If the camera hadn't been in the nest box and we hadn't been live streaming, this chick would have certainly perished. So how did they get on? Well, as the case with these nest boxes series, only time would ever tell us. I will say, however, more food was very clearly being brought in than the previous year. And Biddy and Miley were playing an absolute stormer, bringing in grub after caterpillar for these little growing chicks, and the chicks just kept going strength from strength. And we can see here that the chicks are starting to go from red to black as their pigmentation of their feathers starts coming in. Pin feathers and wing feathers start to grow, and these little chicks slowly but surely start looking like little birds. And then eventually start actually looking like little baby blue tits, something that this nest box hadn't seen for the last 3 years. And so Biddy and Miley managed to finally have 4 chicks ready to go. And on the 25th of May, we had our first chick leave the nest box. And just like that, Biddy and Miley finally have their genetic code in the next generation. And there was still 3 more chicks to go. We can see the feeding continues at this stage, but these chicks are all leaving in the next hour or so. Another chick up. And out it goes. The other 2 looking a little bit bewildered of what had happened. We see one chick seems to be slightly stuck in the nest box there. But the other chick is waiting for no one and heads out. Thankfully, however, this last chick doesn't get stuck in the nest box. He's stuck for momentarily, but he manages to get out and break free. And so finally, we're down to our last chick. It's very much thinking of going. It has one last look around, not knowing that this story has been going on for the last 2.5, 3 years. And the monumental effort Biddy and Miley has went through. And off it goes. Miley comes in realising he's done a job well done. So, thank you so much for watching, and it begs the question, what will 2023 bring? Well, like and subscribe, and we'll see you then. Bye bye.